And then, fear spread across the country, eventually targeting scores of daycare centers. But the story that initially fed the panic was not all it seemed. In the summer of 1983, a 39-year-old mother called the Manhattan Beach Police Department and accused McMartin teacher Raymond Buckey of molesting her 2.5-year-old son.
In the DA's office, all kinds of doubts developed, particularly about the fact that the mother of the first complaining child was psychotic, but they just kept on going. It was like the Titanic. It was like a roller coaster or a ship that just was out of control and couldn't stop.
The police released Buckey for lack of evidence, but then they sent out this letter to some 200 families, instructing them to question their children about sodomy, oral sex, and fondling.
What happens then is the parents start to talk to their kids, and then they start to talk to each other, and then they start to compare notes, and pretty soon emotionally involved parents are engaging in leading and suggestive questioning of their child.
I never understood why Manhattan Beach Police Department didn't deeply investigate her. Okay, it was not done. And had it been done then, I wouldn't be talking about the case. It would never have been filed.
Good morning, this is Cheryl Merrill, and it is September 6th, 2019 on a Friday, and I am having to re-record this because I got complaints that the other one was my voice was too soft, and they could barely hear me, so I'm doing it again in a different way so that people can hear me. That would be helpful. And also I'm going to cut it down. It was a little bit too wordy. And I just wanted to get to some basic points about my observations of this case. I was there in that area back in that time, and I even happened to see that Raymond Buckey guy at the Good Earth restaurant back then, around the time that it was winding down, the court case. That started actually a lot earlier than I had initially believed. It started in 1984 and then continued and was finally done in 1990. But not after injustice was committed against those teachers, and that there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever that it was apparent that there had been hysteria had swept through the community. And the reason hysteria had swept through the community was because the police sent a letter to 200 parents after one initial complaint by some psychotic lady who accused one of the teachers there of molesting his son. And it was confirmed later that she was definitely mentally ill, suffering from some schizophrenia, plus she was an alcoholic. And the police didn't investigate her at all due to, about the complaint. They just wanted to believe what she said was true. So apparently when they investigated Raymond Buckey, the molester of McMartin School, the accused molester, they couldn't find any evidence on him. But that wasn't enough for them, that they had to go and write a letter, a defamatory letter, suggesting that there had been some crimes committed there. And that's what started everything. I wanted to say that one of the reasons why I left the Los Angeles area was because of the growing sensationalism of the media, with all kinds of crazy cases there. And one of them was the McMartin case. I spoke with one of the psychologists there at the time, who was a child psychologist, and she was talking about it and how they were just finding out through hypnosis that the kids were molested and things like that. My psychologist at the time was into the New Age, the New Age kind of psychology. And so later on I can reflect that that many of these women back in that day and age were into the New Age psychology, which was drawing out false memories. And I had done a website later on called brainchannels.com about that very kind of thing, about false memories and a lot of different topics related to the human brain. And I read about false memories, and I realized that is quite probable that did happen to those children, where the evidence in the video I'm going to attach to this podcast shows that the group that was handling that case were not accepting what the children said, that no, that didn't happen. No, that didn't happen. And they would not accept no for an answer. Okay? Then they use peer pressure to draw things out. So, when this kind of thing happens, I realize I go back to the money trail. It has to do with money. And back then, it was admitted by a couple sources that the police didn't make much money back in the 70s and 80s especially. And desperate for overtime, desperate for extra cash, desperate to appear to be making a difference in the community, they were looking for high-profile sensationalist cases. And even if they had to be the cause of the case, they needed the money. So I see this pattern continue down for decades now of police looking for ways to create their own overtime, that they actually are the perpetrators and the cause of it. One example is the Golden State serial rapist and murderer who was part of the police department, and that he could have easily been caught. I did that in one of my previous podcasts, and by the police chief, who he stalked his daughter and shined a flashlight in her bedroom after he was fired, that he was caught stealing dog repellent and there was something else, dog repellent and masking tape, and you think that would be a red flag for a police chief. That, well, we have this local serious rapist here in Auburn, that maybe he's the guy, because that serial rapist seems to be an insider who knows how we operate, but that we can't catch him. So maybe this is the guy, that I just fired, who stole dog repellent. Maybe this is the guy who threatened my daughter at her window. Maybe this is the guy. All I have to do is check for the footprints outside my window. But no, they're relying on sensationalism to scare the communities, caught them red-handed in this McMartin case, not investigating the woman with psychosis, not trying to find out if she was crazy. Back in the day, women weren't believed about their rapists, that they weren't believed. Women scorned kind of thing, just lashing out at their attacker, or boyfriends or husbands or whatever. And now we know that's not true in many cases, but there are still women who do that. But at least the police are going to look into the person's background to see if they have a history of this kind of thing, or if they have a history of mental illness, or they have a history of alcoholism, that they can't be necessarily believed in accusing somebody at a preschool of molesting their child. Because in case you didn't know, of all the child molesting offenses, there's like a 0.007 or something, or 0.07% of all child molesters have been accused at preschool, so it's a very unlikely thing. So if you have this lady who has a psychosis complaining about it, then you've got to really look into that lady first before you start sending letters out to the parents. But like I say, there is a pattern of police looking for sensationalist cases to benefit their overtime and their salaries. And the other cases that happen in that area afterwards. So the Golden Gate serial rapist and killer, who turned out to be a cop, we found out years later, he started in 1979, when the police chief in Auburn could have stopped him, could have caught him very easily. He had all the credibility in the world to do it, and all they had to do was put that man in jail for some time for stalking his daughter, putting him through a court case, shining the light on him. The police chief failed to do that, didn't want to do it. Later on, said he knew it was DeAngelo. He knew that was DeAngelo, who he had fired. but he didn't do anything to suspect, report him as potentially being the serial rapist in the area, like he should have. So these cops are like covering up for each other to help create paranoia and fear in their communities to make money. Okay? To make money, because the police are going to make a lot of overtime on this McMartin case. It lasted for like years and years and years, and they don't care who they put into jail or make their lives miserable. Raymond Buckey was found innocent, and he spent 5 years in jail, and he couldn't sue over it. He couldn't sue anybody over it, because that's how sick our society is, that the police just want to make some overtime, and they need some extra money, and they feel justified to do this to people. They're into S&M. Their mentality is S&M. They don't care who suffers because of their need for overtime, because they feel they need more money to allegedly protect the community. So there is a long pattern of this, and people are so naive to fall into this trap of depending on the police. Because, the police are not that smart. They're really not. I mean, if you think about it, the police are really not that smart. If they can't figure out that one of their own is a serial rapist who figured out how to escape them all the time because he knew how they operated, who they just let go. Oh, what did you need dog repellent for? And why did you steal it? You have the money. Why did you steal it? Why wouldn't you question that person a little bit more to realize you may have a bad egg here in your police force who's out there being the rapist? Because you make more money scaring the public. They make more money scaring the public. That they knew that this, in my opinion, they knew that the Golden State Killer was out there for 40 years living in Sacramento. They knew it because the police chief had memory of that, okay? He should have been able to figure out that that's the guy. That's the guy. I want you guys to know that, he was fired from this police department, and he continued his rampage. See, the thing was that he stopped in 1981 because some guy who was with the girl he raped almost got to him, and he stopped. So there was a 5-year quiet period until 1986 when his last one happened, and then he stopped completely. And so what happened was around that time, the police were looking for more cases to bring in more overtime because these things spread nationally. When they scare the public, it spreads nationally. It's kind of like that Jaws movie, of the 70s, where all you have to do is show a movie like that and everyone won't go into the water for a while. Well, that's how the police are. They make a lot of money by scaring people. And so the next thing they did was, in my mind, the next sensational thing they did after McMartin, that there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever to convict those people, none at all, and they found that the psychologists were definitely planting false memories. The next thing was the Rodney King that the police created by beating up a black man, and knowing that that's going to create overtime because they're going to have to deal with the rioters, deal with the time, all the overtime they have to process, all the rioting, getting everyone hyped up and on the side of the police because of the rioters, so that's the next psyop they ran, okay? But they knew that that beating was being caught on tape. And then the next thing was OJ Simpson, who they could have caught him immediately and had a good case against him. But they chose to screw it up. They screwed up, they tampered with it, and they screwed up the murder scene. They screwed it up. And they knew that they would get a lot of money from this OJ Simpson case. Okay. So I'm being very cynical about the police because I see how they operate and I see how evil and wicked they are. And this McMartin thing only happened because of the police. There was no evidence. When I hear men like Jake Morphonios at Blackstone Intelligence talk the way he does about the McMartin case, I stop listening to him because of it, because I know that that's false. And I know he's sensationalizing it all over again. Innocent people, he has no right to do that. He has no right to do that. They're found innocent. You can't go back and start pointing out things that are completely false, because they were making a lot of money off this case, you know. And when I hear that Jake Marfonios is involved in trying to start it all over again, when it's very clear that they had no evidence. Had they had evidence, they wanted to convict them. You know, how they would have. They would have definitely convicted them. And so he's trying to make it into a conspiracy to cover up satanic abuse, which I completely reject that theory of his. That's when he went off the deep end for me, Jake Marfonios. In fact,